The bell above the door chimed softly, and Michael, or Mike, as everyone here called him, looked up from the register. The late autumn sunlight filtered through the wide window of Langston's books, casting long, golden shadows across. The wooden floor, the smell of old pages, fresh coffee, and something vaguely citrus filled the narrow aisles. "You're early today," he said, his voice low but warm. Claire Monroe smiled, her long wool coat still catching the wind as she pulled it off and shook out her curls. Parent-teacher conferences were canceled. A pipe burst on the second floor. The whole building's flooded. Mike leaned on the counter, studying her. She was flushed from the cold, her cheeks pink. Fingers clutching a paper bag from the Dominican bakery down the block. "You brought muffins," he said, already reaching. "They're for both of us." She replied, pretending to swat his hand. "Coconut and guava. You're spoiled." He grinned, but there was always a flicker of hesitation behind his eyes. He had learned to live simply, but not to stop calculating. 2 years of choosing each word, guarding every truth. Even now, as Claire leaned across the counter to kiss his cheek, a quiet alarm inside him whispered, "Don't get too comfortable." "So what's the plan today, Mr. Manager?" she asked, unwrapping the pastries. "More donations from obscure dead poets?" Mike chuckled. "If we're lucky. But I do need to finish reorganizing the history section." Someone shelved Ta-Nehisi Coates next to Ayn Rand. Claire groaned. "That's just evil." They laughed, easily, like a couple that had built something solid in the cracks of their busy, frugal lives. But for Mike, the weight of the lie was always there. It didn't matter how many mornings they spent reading Baldwin together, or how many nights they walked hand in hand through Bed-Stuy like ordinary lovers. He knew what he was hiding, and worse, he knew why. "Claire," he said suddenly, the muffin half raised in his hand, "do you think people can ever really separate themselves from where they come from?" She tilted her head, surprised. "That's a deep question for 10 a.m. I mean it," he pressed. "Like, if your family was built on something ugly, something unjust, do you think you can ever really walk away from that?" Her eyes narrowed. "Is this about you?" He hesitated. "Just something I've been thinking about." Claire leaned back, thoughtful. "I guess it depends. If someone refuses to benefit from it, actively works against it, maybe even tries to fix the damage, then yes. People can change, but you can't just erase a past. You have to confront it." Her words stung more than she knew. Mike nodded. Slowly. "That's fair." A silence settled between them, but not an uncomfortable one. Just weighty, like something left unsaid had found a seat at the table with them. Later that afternoon, Mike was shelving a shipment of used books. When it happened, the bell chimed again, but this time the air seemed to shift. Customers looked up. Mike froze. In the doorway stood a tall man in a tailored charcoal coat, silver cufflinks catching the light. His skin was the same shade as Mike's, his features harder, colder. He carried himself like a man used to being. "Obeyed, Michael." The word cracked through the room. Claire stood by the poetry shelf, blinking. "Did he say?" Mike turned slowly. "Dad?" The silence in the bookstore was immediate, breathless. Lawrence Turner's eyes didn't blink. He looked at his son like he was inspecting a broken watch. "You've been hiding in this ... place," Lawrence said, scanning the room with disdain. "Selling books? Living like what? A monk." Mike swallowed. "I'm not hiding. You disappeared," Lawrence said sharply. "Left without a word. Do you have any idea what that did to your mother?" "Mom knew," Mike said. "At least part of her did." Claire stepped forward, her voice tentative. "Mike, ... What's going on?" Lawrence turned to her with calculated curiosity. "And you are?" "Claire, I'm his partner." Lawrence gave a clipped smile. "I see." Michael has always had. A taste for rebellion. Mike's hands clenched. You're not welcome here. Oh, I'm aware. But then again, when the New York Times drops a name like Michael Turner, people start calling. Investors, board members. Your silence has become problematic. I don't care about your board, Mike snapped. I care about living in a way that doesn't poison everything it touches. Lawrence's voice dropped, dangerous. You think this moral theater changes the facts. You have Turner blood. Everything you're wearing, everything you know, was paid for by the very world you now condemn. I've been trying to unlearn that world, Mike said quietly. And I won't go back to pretending it's not built on exploitation. Lawrence took a step closer. You don't know the half of it. Their eyes locked. The bell rang again. Someone awkwardly exiting. The tension was unbearable. I came to offer you a path back, Lawrence said. A clean return. No headlines. Just your signature and a new position at Turner Global. Vice President of Ethics and Sustainability. Irony intended. Mike laughed, but there was no joy in it. If you really think I want a title? I left because I learned what our money was built on. Lawrence stiffened. Prison contracts, Dad? Mike's voice was trembling now. Private deals with correctional facilities. Lobbying for tougher sentences in communities that look like ours. Claire's eyes widened. What? You knew? She asked Mike, quietly. I found out before. I left, he said, not looking at her. I didn't know how to handle it. I couldn't be part of it. But I also couldn't bring it down without destroying everything. So I disappeared. Lawrence's voice was low now, razor sharp. You have no idea how deep it goes. Walk away from this again, and you'll regret it. I already regret ever believing we were the good guys. The silence was suffocating. I'll see myself out, Lawrence said. He turned, coat billowing behind him, disappeared into the street. Claire turned to Mike, her voice breaking. Why didn't you tell me? He finally met her eyes, and for once, he had no answer. The night after Lawrence Turner walked into the bookstore, Michael sat alone in his apartment, the city humming faintly outside the cracked window. Claire had gone home hours earlier, saying she needed time to think, but he knew what that meant. He'd spent his life surrounded by silence that looked like diplomacy and distance that sounded like love. This was different. This silence was deserved. He poured himself tea he didn't want and let it sit untouched. His phone buzzed. A text from Deshawn, the bookstore owner. You good? That was wild today. We got your back, bro. Michael stared at the message. For 2 years, these people had known him only as Mike, the quiet, slightly intense guy who shelved books like his life depended on it. Now the mask had cracked. What would they see when they looked again? He didn't respond. He couldn't. Yet, instead, he turned toward his bookshelf, pulling down a manila folder wedged between 2 volumes of Audre Lorde. Inside were documents he had collected over the years. Minutes from Turner Global Board meetings, names of subsidiary shell companies, quietly sealed lobbying agreements. It had taken him months to connect the dots. Turner Development Group, their real estate arm, had invested heavily in revitalizing low-income neighborhoods, which usually meant pushing people out. But it was Turner Correctional Holdings that made his stomach turn. It was buried deep in the investment web, a faceless fund that backed private prison expansions across the country. Their contracts rewarded higher incarceration rates. Their donations fueled campaigns for law and order. Judges. His family's empire had profited from cages. He closed the folder and stared at the window. What if she never forgives me? He thought. What if I'm too late to make anything right? The next morning, Claire showed up at the bookstore before it opened. Michael was inside, restocking the window display. He saw her through the glass. her arms crossed, face unreadable. He opened the door. "Hey," he said softly. "Hi, tea." They stood awkwardly in the entrance. The usual warmth between them had been replaced by something sharper, like standing, barefoot on broken glass. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. She entered slowly, eyes scanning the store like it was unfamiliar. "I couldn't sleep," she said finally. "Kept thinking about your dad, and about you, and all of it." Michael nodded. "Yeah." Claire turned to him. "You lied to me, Mike. I know. You let me think you were just some guy trying to escape noise. Tay, but it's not just about your name. It's about what that name means. You let me love a man who is standing on a minefield, and you said nothing." His chest tightened. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how to without dragging all that filth into our life. I was ashamed and scared that once I told you, you wouldn't look at me the same." "You're right," she said quietly. "I don't." He looked down, but not for the reasons you think. Claire continued. "I'm not mad that you're rich. I'm not mad that you walked away from it. I'm mad that you didn't trust me enough to know the truth. You talk about integrity like it's a compass, but you didn't give me the truth to navigate with." Michael's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," she nodded slowly. "Okay. But now what?" He hesitated. "I want to make it public. All of it. Not just the fact that I walked away, but why. The prison deals. The fake development projects. The corruption. People need to know what this wealth is really built on." Claire blinked. "You're serious." "I've been collecting evidence," he said, reaching for the folder. "But I didn't have the guts to do anything with it before. I was just trying to escape. Now, ... I want to act." Claire looked at the papers. "Going up against your family publicly. That's dangerous and messy." "I know," he said. "But I can't go back. And I can't stay silent." She paused. "If you do this, there's no pretending anymore. You're not Mike, the bookseller. You're Michael Turner, heir-turned whistleblower. There's no quiet life after this." He met her gaze. "Then maybe I was never meant for quiet." Within days, the ripple effect of Lawrence's visit began to show. A photo of their confrontation had surfaced on social media. A customer had snapped it. Without their knowledge, the caption read, "When a billionaire finds his runaway son selling books in Brooklyn. ... It went viral. Reporters showed up within 48 hours. The front window of Langston's was filled with flashes and microphones. Michael stayed silent. He worked quietly and steadily, refusing interviews. But the pressure mounted. One morning, a lawyer from Turner Global approached him outside the bookstore. Sleek suit, perfect teeth. "Mr. Turner, the board would like a conversation, preferably." "Soon," Michael replied without flinching. "Tell the board I'll speak to them in public." He was already planning a press conference. Claire helped him find a nonprofit group that supported whistleblowers and reform activists. They offered legal aid, strategy, and media coaching. But even with support, the stress was crushing. Anonymous threats arrived by email. The bookstore was vandalized one night. Graffiti in red paint. "Traitor, go back to your penthouse." Michael scrubbed it off himself. Claire stayed by his side, but cautiously. Their relationship had shifted. She wasn't sure if they were rebuilding something new or salvaging something cracked. Some nights, they didn't talk at all. Other nights, they argued. "You can't fix it all," she told him once. "No matter how much you give away, you can't undo what's already been done." "I know," he whispered, "but I can stop pretending it never happened." A week later, Lawrence returned, but this time not to the bookstore. He called Michael directly. "Let's meet." His voice, set over the line, just us. Number. Press, no yelling, I'll come to you. They met at a small community center in Crown Heights' neutral ground. Lawrence arrived in a black car, flanked by no one. Michael waited by the basketball court. You always did like to make things difficult, Lawrence said, approaching. I think it's called accountability. Lawrence sighed. You want to? Burn the house down. Fine, but remember, you're inside it too. The world doesn't reward purity, Michael. It rewards power. I'm not trying to be pure, Michael replied. I'm trying to live with myself. Lawrence stared at him for a long moment. Then he said quietly, You really don't want any of it. Michael shook his head. I don't want to inherit pain. There was a flicker, something almost like respect in Lawrence's eyes. Then he turned and walked away. The night before the press conference, Michael stood on the bookstore's roof with Claire beside him. I don't know what happens after this, he said. She took his hand. Neither do the first, but whatever it is. It should be honest. He looked at her. Do you think we can make it? She didn't answer right away. Then, I think we're still writing that part. The city blinked around them, full of people, stories, and silence, waiting to be broken. The sky over Manhattan was a pale gray when Michael Turner stepped out of the black cab on Fifth Avenue. He wore no tie, no designer suit, just a navy wool coat, black slacks, and the calm expression of a man with nothing left to lose. Around him, dozens of reporters were already gathering behind metal barricades. Police stood watch, earpieces buzzing. Cameras whirred. Microphones extended toward him like weapons. Turner Global Investments loomed behind him, a tower of glass and wealth. Its logo a silver T against polished black stone. Inside, billions were traded every day and lives reshaped by decisions made in rooms without windows. Michael approached the makeshift podium erected on the steps. He cleared his throat, heart steady despite the tremor he felt rising in his Hands to Claire stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes fixed on him. She hadn't said much that morning, just kissed his cheek and whispered, "Be louder than their silence." He gripped the edge of the podium. Cameras zoomed in. "My name is Michael Turner," he began. "Some of you know that already. Others only know the version of me that disappeared 2 years ago." He paused. "Today, I want to talk about the truth. Not just my truth, but the truth behind the wealth that built this company. The truth behind how my family made its name." Reporters leaned in. Claire held her breath. "I was born into a world where nothing was ever out of reach. Private jets, Ivy League schools, estate homes in the Hamptons. It was all handed to me. But what I never questioned, not until too late, was what paid for it all." He pulled a thin folder from his coat and held it up. "These are internal documents, emails, and transaction records from Turner Global subsidiaries. Over the last 3 years, I've uncovered the real backbone of our empire, a network of investments tied directly to private prison operators, lobbying firms, and developers who profit from displacing working-class families in cities like this one." A low gasp rippled through the crowd. "For decades," he continued, "Turner Global funded and profited from policies that targeted communities of color, especially Black communities. We supported minimum sentencing laws, funneled money into campaigns that increased incarceration, and made money off every cell that was filled." He let the silence sit. "I am ashamed of this legacy, and I refuse to inherit it." The words were like a blade through the air. He could feel the shift, the crowd bristling. Cameras feeding live to a nation where names like Turner still carried weight. And now, that weight was shifting. "My father will deny this," he said. "He'll claim ignorance or business necessity. But I've seen the documents. I've followed the money, and I've made a decision." Michael took a long breath. "Today, I am publicly relinquishing 90% of my inheritance, Not to charity dinners or trust funds, but to direct action. I am establishing the Justice Reclaimed Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar endowment to fund public education, community housing, prison reform advocacy, and legal aid for those wrongfully incarcerated. The crowd erupted. Questions were shouted. Flashes exploded. Michael raised a hand. This isn't redemption. It's responsibility. We can't rewrite history, but we can stop pretending it didn't happen. Then, as if summoned by those very words, a voice called out from the crowd. Coward. Lawrence Turner stood on the edge of the press barrier. No entourage, no disguise, just rage in a tailored coat. You want to tear it all down? He growled, pushing past the guards. For what? So you can feel pure. Michael stood firm. No, so I can be honest. This is betrayal. No, Dad, what you did, that was betrayal. Of the people who trusted this company. Of the communities you gutted for profit. Lawrence's voice shook with fury. You think you're better than me? Because you put on a flannel shirt and sell books in Brooklyn. I think I've learned how to be human. They stood inches apart now, two men from the same bloodline, but separated by an unbridgeable chasm. You've destroyed your name, Lawrence spat. Michael didn't blink. Good. It wasn't mine to keep. The security detail moved in. Then, guiding Lawrence back, reporters swarmed the moment, shouting questions neither father nor son answered. Michael stepped back to the mic. This is the end of one version of my life, he said, and the beginning of something I still don't fully understand, but I know this much. Silence has a cost, and I'm done paying it. He left the podium. The fallout was immediate. Headlines ran nonstop. Air denounces fortune Michael Turner breaks legacy with public confession Turner Global under federal investigation. After whistleblower bombshell, some called him brave, others naive. A few, including Business Insiders, called him a danger to capitalism itself. But within days, grassroots organizations reached out in support. A GoFundMe for Langston's bookstore raised $80,000. In 48 hours after the vandalism was linked to far-right hate groups, the Justice Reclaimed Initiative gained traction. Lawyers, activists, community leaders all wanted in. Claire helped vet applications, carefully filtering out opportunists. Still, not everything could be salvaged. Michael's relationship with Claire entered a quiet limbo. Some nights she stayed. Some nights she didn't. Their love was real, but what had once been light now carried too many shadows. I miss the simple version of us, she told him one night. So do I, he said. But maybe we were never meant to stay simple. Maybe not. They held each other anyway, like survivors of the same fire. 1 week after the press conference, Michael received a letter from his mother, Evelyn. Handwritten, delicate script. Michael, I watched your speech. I cried. Not because I was ashamed, but because I finally saw you for who you are. You were always too brave for this family, too good, and I let them dim your light to preserve our comfort. I'm sorry. If you ever want to come home, not to the house, but to me, I'm waiting. Love, Mom. He folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer by his bed. A month later, Michael stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony in the Bronx. The new building wasn't glamorous, just 3 stories of red brick and glass. With solar panels on the roof and rent subsidies that kept families from falling into the street. He didn't speak at this one. He just stood in the back, listening as a mother of 3 thanked the Justice Reclaimed Initiative for giving her kids a home they could dream in. Claire stood beside him again, silent but smiling. As the crowd clapped, she leaned in. Do you still miss the quiet life? Michael looked around, the children laughing, the murals on the wall, the people who had never heard of Fifth Avenue but knew what a home meant. He smiled. "No," he said. "This is louder, but it matters." And for the first time, the silence inside him was gone. By December, Manhattan was wrapped in a thin gray frost, the air sharp with the scent of roasted chestnuts and exhaust. Christmas lights blinked lazily across storefronts. For most, life carried on: gift shopping, office parties, forced cheer. But Michael Turner's world had split into two. On one side, there was movement. The Justice Reclaimed Initiative had opened offices in Brooklyn, Atlanta, and Chicago. Their first education grants were already reaching classrooms in neighborhoods long ignored by federal budgets. Eviction prevention funds kept dozens of families in their homes through the winter. And for the first time, journalists began publicly questioning the ethics of generational wealth built on incarceration. On the other side, there was pressure. Turner Global, now under federal scrutiny, was hemorrhaging investors. Lawrence Turner had disappeared from the public eye, replaced by tight-lipped lawyers and a rotating cast of PR specialists. Still, his presence loomed in backroom meetings and back-page editorials, framing Michael as a privileged renegade turned idealist threat. In Michael's inbox, hate and praise arrived in equal measure. Traitor, hero, trust fund clown. Finally, someone with a soul. He stopped reading most of it. What mattered more were the quiet things. The boy who approached him outside the community center in Harlem, holding a dog-eared copy of The Fire Next Time. "My brothers and Rikers. I didn't know people like you could do this." The elderly woman in Crown Heights who brought him a bowl of stew and whispered, "I never thought I'd live to see a Turner care about folks like us." Those moments grounded him, but they didn't protect him. Langston's bookstore was quieter. Now, not from a lack of customers. If anything, foot traffic had increased, but the dynamic had changed. People watched Michael differently. He was no longer Mike from behind the register. He was a symbol, a cautionary tale, a conversation starter. "I read about you," a young man said one afternoon. "My dad says you threw away your future." Michael handed him his change. Without blinking, then maybe it wasn't mine to keep. Claire still came by, but less often. Their relationship had grown careful, still affectionate, still real, but slowed by the weight of everything they couldn't go back to. She had started teaching night classes on media literacy and race in education. She didn't ask him to come. He didn't press. They were both rebuilding something. It just wasn't clear if they'd end up on the same side of the bridge. One bitter Sunday, Michael received a call from Evelyn. She sounded calm, even elegant, as always, but softer now. "Michael, your father's been served with a subpoena. Federal testimony. They're digging into the lobbying contracts." "I know," he said. "There are things he may do to protect himself, things that could affect you." "I'm not afraid of him. I know you're not," she said gently. "But I'm afraid of what this will do to you, to all of us." Michael stared out the window at the frozen sidewalk. There was never going to be a version of this that didn't hurt. "He still loves you," she said, surprising him. He almost laughed. "I don't think he knows how." "Maybe not," she admitted. "But he does know loss. And for the first time, I think he understands that he's losing something he can't buy back." Michael's voice dropped. "He already did." They didn't say goodbye. Just silence. Then the line went dead. The subpoena leaked a few days. Later, a full congressional hearing was scheduled. A new initiative examining the influence of private investment on U.S. incarceration policy. Turner Global was named. So were 5 other legacy firms. Michael was listed as a primary witness. He had expected this, prepared for it. What he hadn't expected was how personal it would become. A week before the hearing, someone broke into his apartment. Nothing stolen, just papers scattered. Drawers pulled open. His laptop smashed. Claire arrived before the police. "They're trying to scare you," she said, holding his hand as they watched forensics sweep the room. "It's working," he admitted. She squeezed his fingers. "But you're still here." He looked at her, a mix of love and sorrow in his eyes. "What if I don't want to be a symbol anymore?" Claire leaned in. "Then stop being one. Be a man who did something right once. That's enough." The night before the hearing, Michael walked through Fort Greene Park alone. Snow clung to the iron benches. In the distance, a group of teens threw snowballs under flickering streetlights. He sat beneath a massive elm tree, its limbs bare and stretching like bones toward the sky. For a long time, he just breathed. He thought about the boy he'd been in penthouses, on private planes, learning early how to disappear behind glass and charm. He thought about the lie he lived when he first met Claire, the ache of every unspoken truth, the arrogance of believing he could ever outrun where he came from. And then he thought of the bookstore, the kids in the Bronx, the quiet man in Atlanta who emailed last week to say, "My son's out, your fund paid his bail. He's home. Thank you." Michael stood, the cold finally sinking through his coat. This wasn't about guilt or redemption. It was about choosing the next right thing. At the hearing, he sat at a long oak table, microphone in front of him, name placard crisp and stark, Michael L. Turner. Independent whistleblower senators questioned him for hours. How long were you aware of Turner Global's prison investments? Why didn't you act sooner? What would you say to those who believe this is just performance? He answered each question steadily. When I left, I wasn't ready to face it, but I am now. This is not about personal gain. Signed away legal control of the funds I've redirected. And then, toward the end, one senator leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Mr. Turner, do you regret exposing your family?" Michael thought of Claire, of Evelyn, of his father, of himself. "I regret that it took me so long to do it," he said. "But I don't regret the truth. I don't think we can survive as a society if people like me stay quiet just because it's easier." A hush fell across the chamber in the back row. A young black man in a security uniform gave Michael a small, almost imperceptible nod. Michael returned it. That night, back in Brooklyn, Claire met him at the bookstore. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied. "We just started." She nodded. "I was thinking about what you said, about not wanting to be a symbol, and maybe we don't get to choose. Maybe the world decides who becomes a symbol. But we can decide what we do with it." Michael took her hand. "For now." He said, "Can we just be people again?" Claire smiled. We never stopped. They locked the door. The street was quiet. Inside, the world was still, but for once, not empty. 6 months later, the Turner name was no longer only synonymous with skyscrapers and Wall Street. It had become a litmus test for power, for privilege, for what happens when silence breaks and truth is no longer private. Michael Turner, no longer needed to hide. He stood now in front of a newly opened community school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, the Elijah Whitmore Learning Center, named after Claire's grandfather, a civil rights activist and retired teacher who had marched from Selma to D.C. and lived long enough to see none of his dreams fully realized until now. A crowd of local families stood gathered for the ribbon cutting. Children with backpacks decorated with comic book stickers ran between folding chairs. Community leaders, teachers, and city officials spoke briefly. But it was Michael they came to see. He wore a simple gray button-down sleeves rolled up. No teleprompter, no security. Just a paper folded in his hand. When he stepped up to the podium, the crowd quieted. "I used to think my story started in boardrooms and marble halls," he began. "But I think it really started the day I walked into a bookstore in Bed-Stuy and asked for a job. I didn't need just to see if I could be a person without a last name. A few people laughed gently. Claire smiled in the front row. I learned that wealth doesn't just distort the world around us, it distorts the stories we tell ourselves. It tells us that comfort means success, that history is something to be managed, not confronted. That power is safety. It's not. He looked down briefly, then back at the crowd. I come from a family that did a lot of harm. My silence was part of that. My education, my comfort, all bought at a cost someone else paid. But today isn't about guilt. It's about truth and the work of repairing. He stepped aside, letting a 14-year-old girl speak next, a student from the first class enrolled. Her poem about justice received a standing ovation. Michael sat in the front row and watched, not as a founder, not as a son, but as a witness to what real legacy could look like. Claire had stayed, not for the headlines. Not out of pity, but because the man she'd met in a bookstore, the one who shelved poetry like it was sacred, was still in there. Just more complicated, more whole. Their love was different now, quieter, but fuller. They no longer imagined a perfect future. They built one instead, brick by honest brick. She taught full-time at the Learning Center now. Media literacy, advanced English, African American literature. Her classroom walls were lined with portraits of writers who had once been banned, ignored, or underestimated. One evening, while walking home, she said, "You know what I realized?" "What?" "We never had the fairy tale." He looked at her. "No, we had the reckoning, and I think I prefer it." He squeezed her hand. "Me too." The Justice Reclaimed initiative became a model. Other wealthy heirs followed a ripple effect that no one, not even Michael, had foreseen. Trust fund kids from Silicon Valley and Park Avenue came forward. Some fumbled their way through. Some vanished at the first sign of pushback. But the conversation had started. One of the programs funded by the initiative brought young formerly incarcerated men and women into mentorship roles across New York public schools. They spoke not just of what they'd survived, but of what they'd become. Michael met one of them, a 22-year-old named Ramon, after a panel. "I thought rich dudes like you didn't give a damn about kids like me," Ramon said. Michael nodded. "I didn't for a long time. Not because I didn't care. I just didn't know how to see." Ramon smiled. "You're looking now." And then there was Evelyn. She sold the Upper East Side penthouse, quietly, discreetly. Moved into a modest brownstone in Harlem. Began volunteering, not with Gala-ready charities, but at a domestic violence shelter, where no one cared about her last name. She and Michael had lunch once a month. It was never easy, but it was honest. "I let your father drown us in shame." Masquerading as pride, she told him once over tea, "You did what you could." Michael said, "I did what was convenient," she corrected. "But I'm learning," and she was. Lawrence Turner did not go to prison. He struck a deal, a heavy financial penalty, removal from the company's board, and a public acknowledgement of unethical investment strategies. He gave no apology. Just a cold statement released to the press: Turner Global will evolve. That is all. He moved to a private estate in Montana. Out of sight. Out of relevance, the empire shrank. The world did not end. On a quiet afternoon in April, Michael sat on the fire escape of the apartment he still hadn't left. Below, the bookstore hummed with life customers browsing, the bell on the door chiming softly. He had received an offer to write a book. Several, actually. He hadn't decided yet. There was something about holding the silence a little longer. Not because he feared it, but because now it wasn't hollow. It was reflection. It was choice. Claire leaned out the window beside him. "What? Are you thinking about legacy? Yours? The one we undo every day?" She rested her head on his shoulder. "You ever think about what your kids will inherit?" He thought for a moment. Hopefully, ... A truth that doesn't need hiding. That summer, the New York Times ran a follow-up story. From Wall Street to Justice Street, Michael Turner's Year After Silence. It went viral again, but Michael didn't read it this time. Instead, he read a letter, written by a boy in Chicago whose brother had been released after 4 years in juvenile detention. The boy was 12. He'd written, "Dear Mr. Mike, my brother is home now. He got a job at the bike shop. We eat dinner together. We laugh again. I don't know how to say thank you, so I drew this." Inside was a sketch of a house. To table, 4 stick figures holding hands. The words, "You helped us be a family again." Michael framed it, and for the first time in his life, it felt like something he'd helped build wasn't just real. It was good, because in the end, the silence wasn't broken by rage or scandal. It was broken by a choice. A man with every reason to protect himself chose instead to be honest. And in that honesty, he found something that money could never buy. A purpose worthy of his name.